Okay, despite the fact I'm alone, I'm going to go ahead and get started. This is where we stopped last time. I apologized for calling off class on Tuesday of last week. It was 2 days before Thanksgiving, and I needed to fly out of here at 4. I needed to fly out of Albuquerque at 4 o'clock, 4:30. So I felt like I needed to go. So as it turned out, I only got there a couple hours early, despite the fact so if I hadn't called off class, I probably wouldn't have made my flight. So there you go. We're talking about juror bias and juries awarding awards to different organizations. Public believes that businesses and corporations should be held to a higher standard of responsibility than individual defendants. Any inflation of awards against corporate defendants is apparently related to their status as a corporation and not to their wealth. As you can see, this is kind of an interesting picture because it shows some of the dominant businesses in each state. Dr. Pepper in Texas, Coors beer in Colorado, my own home state of Indiana has Cummins Diesel. They make diesel engines. Caterpillar for Illinois, and on, and Cabela's in Nebraska. Motel 8, which I'm not exactly sure if that really dominates South Dakota, but there you go. So what do we have here in Arizona is Best Western, and New Mexico is the convenience store Alsop's, as weird as that is. When jurors must share their interpretations of the evidence publicly, they may become aware of their personal biases and work to set them aside. And so when we're dealing with 12 individuals, if one of the individuals or half a dozen of the individuals have strange prejudices, normally these don't come out in a jury trial. They try to hide them, to keep them from everybody else. Deliberations may cause them to evaluate the evidence more carefully, correct misinterpretations, and challenge the biases and prejudices of others. And of course, that's why there's 12 people. If there was just one individual, like the judge had a prejudice against Native males, then of course it would be fairly obvious. But if there were 12 individuals and 3 of them had prejudices against Native males, then it would be dissipated by the other 9 people. And those 3 people would probably not try to hide their prejudices. Deliberating juries do not always make better decisions than individual jurors. Whether group deliberation reduces or amplifies biases may depend on the strength of the evidence. When the evidence for either side in a trial is strong, deliberation seems to decrease, and pre-deliberation bias that might exist, any pre-deliberation bias that might exist. But when the evidence is ambiguous, deliberation seems to increase biases. And of course, that is a problem. If you've ever seen the movie 12 Angry Men, really good movie to watch people's prejudices being questioned, and it's really just a fascinating movie. How do jurors make sense of the evidence that they hear during the trial? Hastie and Pennington developed a story model to describe inferences that individual jurors make when reaching a decision in a case. And I've told you about my brother's murder case, not the fact that he murdered somebody, but he was on a jury of a murder trial, and they worked out what happened. And strangely enough, well, I guess it's not that strange, the defense presented one type of story. The prosecution had a completely different story. So the question was, who are you going to believe? Are you going to believe the defense attorney's story, or are you going to believe the prosecuting attorney's story? And as it turned out, They didn't believe either one. They created their own scenario as to what happened based on the evidence, because some of the evidence, of course, if the evidence didn't agree with the prosecution's story, they just left that piece out. And then, of course, the defense attorney had a completely different storyline, a completely different scenario. And if it didn't fit in his scenario, he just left it out. So it was really up to the jury to come up with their own story. And they did. And, of course, they determined that the individual had shot his wife when he grabbed the gun away from her. As soon as he turned it toward her, the trigger went up because it was a hair trigger, and that was that. They charged him with manslaughter because he'd had several other convictions. His manslaughter plea took him to put him in jail for a couple of years. According to the model, the story model, jurors actively construct stories by considering three sources of information. The evidence presented during the trial, of course, and that's what we were talking about before. Their personal experience in similar situations. How would I react in a similar situation to this? And their broad knowledge of the elements of a story. So they look at the evidence, they look at their own personal experiences, and they equate that with what they know about the story. Let me make sure this thing's aiming in the right direction. Maybe shooting off a... Okay, I think we're okay. After jurors learn about the verdict options in the case, options in the case, they map their story onto the verdict options and determine which verdict fits best with their constructed story. And so they're constantly putting the story together. As they get new information, the story changes. It's a new block of information that they have, and now, of course, they have to come up with their own construction. Some reforms have been uncontroversial. There are several reforms that we're going to talk about. Listing witnesses and summarizing their testimony in long or complex cases is one. Giving pre-instructions or interim instructions during a lengthy trial, and this is so that they can keep their mind going in the right direction as far as the case is concerned. Allowing jurors to take notes. If you've ever watched television, then you rarely see jurors taking notes in a jury trial. This is because New York does not allow jurors to take notes, at least they didn't in the old days. So since most of our television came out in New York and California, whatever the rules were in New York and California looked like they were national rules, but of course that's not true. So now in some states, in most states, jurors are allowed to take notes so that they can keep up with things. Designating alternate jurors only after the trial is completed. Not exactly sure what that has to do with anything. Providing a written copy of the judge's instructions to each juror so that they can study what they're supposed to be doing. Allowing jurors to examine the demonstrative evidence during their deliberations so that they can look at information, at least information they can carry around, evidence they can carry around. There are two reforms that have been more radical. Allowing jurors to pose questions to witnesses. Of course, if you've ever watched a jury trial, not a real or you could watch real trials, I guess. The jurors very rarely, in very few states, are jurors allowed to ask questions. Generally, the questions that they have to ask are, hey Levi, are screened by the judge, and the judge gets to decide whether the question is appropriate or not. Jurors questioned about the opportunity to submit questions have been strongly supportive of this innovation, mainly because they're primarily just listening to the lawyers. And lawyers, like I said before, lawyers know about law, but they don't know about anything else. They don't know about medicine, they don't know about engineering, they don't know about cars, they don't know things. Sometimes they like to think they do, but they don't. I've met lawyers that consider themselves geniuses, therefore they're kind of like Donald Trump. They're just natural geniuses and they understand things just automatically. It's just a gift that they have. But the reality is, of course, they don't, that's not the way it works. Or fortunately or unfortunately. Another jury reform, a relatively new jury reform, is allowing jurors to discuss the evidence in the midst of the trial. One of the things, if you've ever watched the trial, especially from California, they're always told not to discuss the case until deliberation, which means that it could be a 2 or 3 week case, and they'd be listening to evidence, and they couldn't talk to any of the other jurors about it. Of course, usually, if that is the instructions, then the whole essence of the show is 2 people getting together and actually discussing the evidence and them deciding how the case is going to turn out. And then they fall in love, and then the bad guys start chasing them. It gets really interesting after that. So if you allow them to discuss the evidence in the midst of the trial, then one thing that happens is that it improves the comprehension by permitting jurors to sift through and organize the evidence into a coherent framework over the course of the trial. And of course, that was one of the complaints of the impeachment trial that they just held. Well, they haven't actually held a trial yet, of course, but they've deliberated, or they're going to come out with the charges tomorrow. But one of the things, if you watched it, there was just a lot of information coming in, and sometimes there were 12 people that testified, and one of the complaints was, well, geez, we're Americans and we don't pay attention. We're not very good at paying attention, so we can't remember one person from the next person. We can't remember one piece of evidence from the other evidence. Strangely enough, or not strange, I guess, was that all of the evidence pointed in the same direction. So it shouldn't be that difficult to remember. Was there a quid pro quo? Sondland said yes, and he was a Trump appointee, and he said that yes, there was a quid pro quo. They were trying to claim that there was no quid. The Republicans were trying to claim there was no quid pro quo. This is getting really fascinating to see what's going to happen. The Republicans published a 123-page rebuttal to all the evidence that came in, which I found really kind of fascinating, since most of it doesn't have anything to do with what we just found out in the trial. They got conspiracy theories about the Ukraine hacking into the DNC server. Of course, nobody agrees with that, including the Republicans. As it turns out, they had a Senate committee that looked into that in 2017, and they found that there was no credible evidence to suggest that the Ukrainians hacked into the DNC server, which wasn't a server anyway. It wasn't a solid. It was a cloud. I mean, they utilized the cloud just like everybody was utilizing the cloud, which should warn people away from using the cloud, since it's hackable. And it's not that difficult to hack the cloud, I guess, evidently, because people seem to do it. They seem to find nude photos of just about anybody that you can think of on the cloud. No offense to you, I hope you don't have any nude photos up on the cloud. Congratulations. Yeah. Good choice, good choice. Neither do I, and neither does my wife that I'm aware of anyway. It improves recollection of the evidence and testimony by emphasizing and clarifying points made during the trial. Of course, one of the things about the impeachment trial is that there's a lot of evidence, and because not everybody is a lawyer, not everybody cares about this kind of stuff. If you miss a couple days, then you missed some fairly significant evidence that they have given. They've had, like I said, they had 12 people that testified, and all of it pointed in the same direction, as far as I could tell. But the question is, of course, if you're a Republican, then you're listening to this stuff and you're going, no, that's not. So you just discount it. And that's what the 123 pages had to do with. The 123 pages had to do with nothing credible. It was just they're going, well, I don't believe that. Trump wouldn't do that. Trump doesn't trust the Ukrainians. That kind of thing. It was really kind of an interesting 123 pages. Promote greater cohesion among jurors, thereby reducing the time needed for deliberations. Okay, there's the 12 angry men again. There are several potential drawbacks to having jury discussions during trial. There's a possibility that jury discussions may facilitate the formation or expression of premature judgments about the evidence, and therefore, and of course this is a problem. The police, and we complained about this with the police, of course. The police, when they're getting evidence and they decide how they are going to accumulate evidence, a lot of times they just accumulate evidence against a select individual, and they don't try to exonerate that individual, which is really strange. I was going to say, two people in the room and one of them is to threat the other. That would have been funny. Humorous, it would have been humorous, does that make sense? Anyway, okay. So where are we done? Right. So the police do this. The police will do this. They'll decide somebody's guilty, and then they'll try to accumulate evidence against that individual, but they won't try to accumulate evidence that exonerates the individual. So they're prejudiced. At that point, they're prejudiced, of course, and this can be a really serious problem. Diminish the quality of deliberations as jurors become more familiar with each other's views. A lot of times it has to do with personality. Everybody's trying to make Charlie happy in the corner, so everybody kind of points their evidence or tries to adjust their evidence so it fits what Charlie thinks. Produce more interpersonal conflicts prior to formal deliberations, and of course this can be a problem as well. Researchers found that those who were permitted to discuss the evidence, approximately 70% reported that their jury had at least one such discussion. Jurors who had discussions were quite positive about them. They liked having discussions. They liked trying to figure out where the other people were on the jury. They said that trial evidence was remembered very accurately during these discussions. The discussions helped them understand the evidence in the case, and that all jurors' points of view were considered. I was talking about my sister. I had two sisters. One of my sisters died. The smart one died. The dumb one lived. I know that sounds cruel. I hope she doesn't watch this. Anyway, I was talking about my sister with my wife over Thanksgiving, and my sister's really kind of interesting. She doesn't want to think. She doesn't want to think. So she watches television that she's already watched so that she doesn't have to think about it. How can I explain this? She doesn't do something where it's going to take her to figuring something out. She does word searches. Now, I don't have any problem with word searches, except it's kind of mind-numbing. You're looking for something that's there, right? It's not like doing your crossword puzzle where you have to figure out what the answer is. Where you have to think. Or she hates Sudokus. Just the whole, and she hates those because she has to think.
I'm the same way.
You don't want to think.
No. I just don't understand that.
It's just, It's arithmetic progression. It's so logical.
Are you the only one in your family out of your siblings that has a degree?
No, all my siblings.
What did she get a degree in?
Her degree is in, she's a stewardess.
Oh.
That's an AA. And then she never thought again. And she was never a stewardess. Which is kind of stupid. So my mother's dying, and we're all sitting there, and she says, well, you know, I got 135 IQ, and I was thinking, IQ just means potential. And if you never use your potential, it doesn't mean anything. Why am I talking about that? Oh, because my sister would never, if she were on a jury, it would be impossible. Because she'd forget everything. She doesn't want to think about it. It just doesn't make any sense. Anyway, so we need 12 people that will actually listen and think. And of course, my sister, despite the fact she's so brilliant, she doesn't want to have to think. I have a brother that's like that. That's like that too.
He's so brilliant, don't have to think.
Yeah, I've got relatives who have IQs that are astronomical. I mean, they're in that 180 range. And these individuals live in trailers, and they never made it past the 8th grade. And all they do is talk about how smart they are. They can do Jeopardy really well on television. I don't know what they're going to do when Alex Trebek dies. But, they're brilliant, except they just don't want to do anything. So they just kind of lay around and gain weight. They're just real tubby people. I have one guy that, one of my cousins, hadn't left his trailer in like a year and a half. And then he needed to leave. He was going to leave to go buy Christmas presents. Couldn't get through the door. It was too big to get through the door. And his mother just, oh, he's so brilliant. Yes, he was so smart that he just couldn't handle high school because, you know, the teachers weren't as smart as he was. So he dropped out of school and became a bum. Luckily, he married somebody that, anyway, I have lots of relatives like that. Individuals who never live up to their potential. My brother's the same way. He's got a really high IQ, but he lets everybody else make his decisions for him so that he doesn't have to, so that he'll never be wrong. It's kind of fascinating. He's also a Republican. That has to do with it.
That explains it.
It explains everything.
What do you call that type of behavior?
What do you mean?
What they do?
You mean the fact that they're lazy? Pieces of shit?
No, I was gonna say more of the what would you call that behavior, like where they're afraid of being wrong, or not afraid of being wrong, but they don't like being wrong.
Well, it's kind of narcissistic. Especially with my brother. He's always holding his eye. It's like he's got a tattoo on his forehead. His IQ. It's a lot higher than mine is, that's for damn sure. I don't, narcissistic, I guess. I don't know. I'll have to think about it, okay? Before I can diagnose my relatives. Juries don't always get it right. On occasion, they are overwhelmed by the volume of the evidence, misunderstand the instructions, and use evidence inappropriately. Biases and prejudices can color judgments. We've had this problem, especially in the South in the past, where if you were black, you were convicted. If you were not black, then you weren't. Psychologists find little support for the claims that charge juries with poor and irresponsible performance. And of course, there's not a whole lot you can do about that. And that is the end of that chapter. So 14 is the last chapter we're going to cover, mainly because I never get past 14 for some reason. Whoops, wrong one. There we go. That's the one I wanted.
Are there states that, because this next chapter is on punishment and sentencing, and it goes over evidence, based sentencing.
Right.
Do you, off the top of your head, are there any states that you're aware of that practice this kind of
Evidence-based
sentencing?
sentencing. There are judges who do evidence-based.
So it's up to this judge.
Yeah, well, it's not up to the state. You couldn't write a law that said you have to use this to determine the sentence of the individual before you. Because not all judges are the same. A lot of judges are elected, so some of them are good and some of them are not so good. Let's go through it,
Okay.
and then we can talk about it. Whoops, I'm on the wrong slide. Okay, psychology of punishment and sentencing. The purpose of a sentence depends on the nature of the crime, characteristics and the experiences of the offender, 3 strikes you're out situation, temperament of the judge. Is he a hanging judge? Does he think that all criminals are bad people that need to be put away? And in some cases, public sentiment. A good example of that would be, no, what the hell's wrong with me today? A good example of that would be strange dreams last night, just really weird. Haven't figured it out.
You have a good dream?
I'm a Freudian, I'm a Freudian, so I have to figure out what my dreams mean. What was I talking about? No, I can't remember what I was talking about. Public sentiment, okay. The case of the little girl, the 10-year-old that was murdered by her mother's boyfriend and his aunt. I think it was his aunt. Anyway, and the mother sold the child on the internet. Everybody is just really upset about that. To some extent, I mean, it's not like they want to fix anything. They don't want to throw any money at anything. They don't want to spend any more money. They just want to be pissed. It's kind of the same way with the murdered and missing women's situation on the reservation. A lot of people are going, oh my God, we got to do something about this. But nobody wants to spend any extra money to hire anybody to do anything about it. We just want to complain about it.
I just saw an ad recently about that. I can't remember it now.
Wasn't there something with Trump?
Trump signed, he signed a task force. There you go.
He's so, okay, I don't understand him. Like, what the heck are you thinking? Because like all of a sudden you're trying to help Native people, but you're cutting down the land. Like, I don't understand.
It's kind of like a magic trick. Like,
Here, watch this over here.
Watch the sleight of hand. Like, watch this over here, but there's
You're right,
something else
you're
going
right.
on over
Yeah.
here.
Don't look over here. Don't look over here. Watch me over here.
And the thing is, like, people don't think for themselves, so they buy into it. I don't know.
You're right. People don't think for themselves. People just listen to what's going on, and they only hear what they want to hear.
Like the online warriors.
Exactly. That's a good point.
I'm telling you, it's like my uncle. I'm like, I don't understand how, as a Native American, you can be a Trump supporter. Like, he's a ding dong. Like, are you not aware of everything that he's doing? Like,
And the answer is no. He only listens to what he says. And if you listen to what he says, the call is perfect. He's the best president that has ever been. He's even convinced that Republicans that he's the best president that has ever been around. That he's better than Abraham Lincoln. He's a better president than Abraham Lincoln. We celebrate Abraham Lincoln every year. We used to celebrate his birthday. Now we just celebrate President's Day. But it's because George Washington and Abraham Lincoln were the two premier, the best two presidents we've ever had And now all of a sudden, the Republicans, there are a large percentage of Republicans think that Trump is a better president than Lincoln.
But a lot of Republicans, they believe in like being conservative, right?
Right.
Then how do they feel about their first lady and how all of those pictures?
What
I mean,
pictures? Oh, you mean the nude pictures?
yeah, like,
When she was a model?
maybe it's just me, is that like considered being conservative?
No, but they don't care. Why
But
would-
see, but I mean, they're contradicting themselves because it's like if you're gonna believe in something, don't half-ass it. Believe in it and like,
No.
It's
That's
just-
not the rule. The rule is you should have asked everything.
okay,
It's like church, they don't really.
Right.
They don't really follow through with their faith until
Exactly.
that one day.
Right, yeah. So today's Sunday, so Sunday I'm a good Christian, and tomorrow I
I was
will,
making the grass.
I will walk past people and not give them any money because, and I'll rationalize it,
Yeah.
but I will pretend that that's being a Christian.
So my whole thing is, I'll just analyze this and like, but who am I to say these things? I got my own issues. So it's just like, I don't understand. I just really don't understand what he's doing. Like, it's cool that like he is doing whatever, and I didn't really read into it, but it's like, I don't know.
It's not cool. All he's doing is he's creating a task force. We're talking about 567 different tribes in the United States. We're talking about over 200 reservations.
Mhm.
Okay. So what we're really talking about is it's going to be so diluted. We think that he's going to come down to the Navajo reservation and start investigating murders and whatnot. It ain't going to happen. I mean, we've got missing and murdered women in North Dakota, in Montana, in
Yeah.
South Dakota, in Idaho, in Washington. And he's going to, and what this task force is going to do, it's going to go wherever they get the most publicity, which is probably going to be Montana and North Dakota, I would guess. But then again, we just had problems with the Indians in North Dakota, so maybe they will come down here. Maybe they'll come down to New Mexico and Arizona. But there's a lot of problems in this area between native peoples. A lot of the Indians here don't like each other. So that's going to be a problem. He needs to go someplace where Indians actually get along with each other. That would be Montana, Washington, Oregon, or California. See, they could go to California. I'm talking about there's one, Trump's going to come out there by himself and head out this task force trying to find all the Indians. All the missing and murdered people. But it's just a task force, which means there's going to be like 5 people on the task force. They're going to wander around the country, pulling in $1 million apiece, and they're going to talk a good ball game, but they're not going to do anything about it. How in the world could this work? How in the world could we stop this missing and murdered women's situation on the reservations? You guys are here, you guys are part of this. How can we do this? See, this is what I told Jeremiah that he needed to do. See, he's got the same problem. He's got to come up with he's got to write all this stuff up, this missing and murdered women's thing. But I told him, you need to talk to your students about this. They've got ideas. They know how to do this. So how would you do it?
Well, I think that, I don't know what the statistics are, but I'm sure a lot of people in general go missing on this reservation because of their substance abuse or alcoholism.
Okay.
Their risky behavior puts them in these situations
Right.
to where they're running around with people that things do happen.
Sure.
And just last week, somebody in my community got killed over meth. And so there's those kinds of situations.
By his friend.
Yeah. And so there was a big old manhunt, but he got caught. Anyways, so I think that those are things to look at and to just bring awareness, but also that just leads into this whole other thing about what is the reservation even doing about that? And they know it's a big issue,
Sure,
and it has been, but,
right.
I think for the res, you kind of gotta bring more than awareness.
mm,
You need to actually bring a certain kind of action. I don't know what kind of action in this situation, but when you try to bring awareness to things to keep it on the red, it's kind of sort of flat right button. Even though you have all these different things.
Information means
Yeah.
nothing.
Yeah, and it's not like they're really going out to utilize it. So I think kind of taking an initiative and bringing some kind of, bring them some kind of initiative too, to kind of ride off on, I don't know, like, what you want out of them. And like, I guess in a sense, giving them the direction, because in most cases, that's kind of what it seems like they do. At least here on the Navajo reservation, it's kind of that, kind of give, like, push them that way a little bit to
Right.
get them going.
There's a statistic out there that's been out there for a couple of years now that keeps being repeated by women on the reservation, that 93% of all sexual rapes and sexual molestations are occurring because of non-native men. 93%. It's this amazing statistic. We haven't figured out where that statistic comes from. Makes it look like I'm the most dangerous person in the whole area because I'm non-native. But that kind of a statistic really skews what the problem is. The problem is endemic. The problem is family. The problem is friends. The problem is the fact that you won't say anything negative about your relatives. And a lot of times they're the ones that are the problem. You get mothers in Pinyon, this is when they first got here, that were selling their children for meth. For sex. I mean, they were selling them as slaves, but they were selling them as sex slaves, I guess. And this is a problem. It was people on the reservation. It's not like, these cool guys from Phoenix are coming up for a little 3-year-old tail up in Pinyon. It's not what's going on. It was the guys in Pinyon. It was the natives in Pinyon. So the biggest problem is, it's the same way with rape. I mean, they have this myth about rape that the most dangerous person was the stranger around the corner. That ain't true. 80% of the time, rapes and molestations are being perpetrated by people that you know. And that's the way it is with this murdered and missing women's thing. If we start focusing on people coming onto the reservation to steal women and steal children off the reservation, we're going to be missing the boat a lot. This is a statistic that is a nice statistic, but we can't figure out where it came from. And it sounds good. It's like Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a disease. You're not responsible for this disease. We can't do that. You can't lose focus on what the real problem is. The real problem is incest. It's in your family. There are problems off the reservation, and there are people coming onto the reservation, but not 93%. I mean, if that's our only focus, we're gonna miss the boat completely.
And I think that you're absolutely right. It's just like we want to place the blame on other people, but it's like we're not taking accountability for what's happening in our own household.
Exactly.
It's like with that whole, missing murdered indigenous, relatives and stuff. And I understand that, and like I said, a lot of it has to do with people abusing alcohol and drugs.
Right.
They're putting themselves into these risky behaviors.
Exactly.
But people have to be wanting to change, you know? It's like you have to put an effort into it. I didn't get sober by just laying on my ass. I would have still been freaking strung out on dope
Sure.
and been somewhere, you know? I didn't want to live that kind of life anymore, so I took the initiative to search to get help for myself. You know, and a lot of people don't want to do that. They want this magic pill and
Right.
to be told that their problems are going to go away and I have the magic words, but
And that they're victims.
Yeah.
And they're victims of historical trauma. So
Uh-huh.
it's my fault. It's my fault that you guys
Yeah.
are frums. I apologize for that. I know that Kit Carson wanders around raping women.
he's that
I
94%.
know.
So,
He's just an amazing
you
fellow.
know, with the club that I'm affiliated with on campus, I'm sure a lot of people aren't aware of it, but there's little things that we do, and I know that, and it happens here, even on campus, you know, with students that I go to school with, you know, it's like, there isn't magic words that I can tell you that's gonna make you stop right now.
Right.
And if that was, then there would be no substance abuse. But it's just simply just bringing awareness to, you know, what is out there. Here are the resources.
Correct.
Whether, you know, they're right here, you can utilize them or not, or you can continue to live in the same behavior that you're doing and it's not going to get you anywhere.
So is the task force going to help anything? That's the real question.
Probably not,
Yeah, What you-
unfortunately.
It's gonna be another one of those outside looking in.
exactly.
And they don't understand.
Well, look how bad you guys are. Exactly. Yeah, they'll bring somebody from Washington D.C. or somebody from the East Coast. They have no clue. They're totally clueless. They don't even know that people farm. They think food comes from the delicatessen down the street.
Yeah,
They don't understand food. How in the world could they possibly understand what's going on in the reservation? They'll look at your houses and say, oh my God, look, these people are living in poverty. No, that's not a bad house. And they're living in the desert. Jesus, what do you want their houses to look like? Do you want people to live in mansions? And the answer is yes, because that's the neighborhood that they live in.
so as far as like children in this situation, you know, that's a whole different, aspect when you look at, you know, the missing murder. Because for myself, like the best thing that I can do to protect my child is little things. And it's a big thing, is making sure that I see her get on the bus.
Exactly.
I'm there when she gets off.
Exactly.
You know, like that,
You've got to care.
yeah.
And that's the essence of being a parent, is you've got to care. And you've got to care not 5 days a week, 7 days a week, 24/7. You've got to watch your children all the time. You've got to be with them. You've got to tell them that you care about them and that you want them to be safe.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, I mean, kids hide. I mean, they do silly things. They get angry and they hide. And then something horrible may potentially happen to them. But you gotta care. And that's the essence of protecting your children on the reservation. And it's not just a parent's job, it's a grandparent's job, it's aunts and uncles' jobs. If you've got a boozy uncle, you need to keep the kids away from that idiot, because for one thing, he doesn't understand that life goes on 24/7, because he's drunk. 6 hours, he's passed out, and he has no clue what's going on.
So I wonder if there's been any sort of study that has been done on the reservation to have those statistics to show that those things happen inside the home, as far as molestation, rape,
No,
you know, and it's like,
no.
we don't talk about those things.
You don't talk about
You know?
those things, and you don't want your reservation to look bad. So you don't want people coming onto the reservation doing this research.
So, and that's just it. It's not
It's not going to change because you're not facing the truth.
it's like this, I have a family member that works for the state, for the nomination, and there was an incident years ago where there was a family member that had been molesting this child, and when it went to court, instead of the uncle getting, going to prison or any sort of criminal whatever, you know,
The family defended.
there was a peacemaking. And it's like, well, what about the well-being of the child and the trauma she's gonna have to live with? And now she's just a drug addict off the reservation. And it's like, there was no justice for her. Like
She sells herself for her drugs too.
and
Why would she do that? Well, she was shown that her life is not worth anything. That the tribe is more important than her well-being is.
so now, thankfully, and you know, when things like that do happen, the federal government does now step in and take over those cases. And so there's also those kinds of situations, but it's just like a lot of, and like I said, you know, you're well aware, I wasn't raised on a reservation. So I'm not shy to talk about these things and hide it, you know, because it needs to be brought out to the surface. But being here, you know, when I went to a sexual abuse panel 2 weeks ago, people didn't want to talk about.
You don't talk about sex on this reservation.
No.
It's not something you talk about.
So,
It's embarrassing.
yeah. And so it's like,
So it doesn't happen
yeah.
until somebody turns up pregnant.
So I don't know.
Or Uncle Charlie rapes his 6-year-old niece or 8-year-old niece or 12-year-old niece. And then the family tries to hide it because, you know, grandma, that's her favorite boy. That was her
Yeah.
favorite. So nobody's going to say anything negative about Charlie or Neva.
So, you know, I don't know. I just think that just relating to people and letting them know that, you know, you're not alone, like this is okay to
Exactly.
talk about these things. you know,
Exactly.
'cause-
And that you're not going to hide it.
yeah,
And see, that's what needs to happen, and that's what I've been trying to convince Jeremiah of. That what he needs to do is talk about not creating a task force. Task force is empty words. They need investigators. They need special investigators dealing with these cases, these missing and murdered people. And they can work on other cases too, but they need to work on all these cold cases. I mean, there's probably bodies buried all over the place
yeah.
that need to be taken care of. People need closure, except we just don't deal with closure. You close things off after 4 days. Probably shouldn't put all this stuff.
You gonna edit your video?
I'm gonna get in trouble. Oh, man. Anyway. So maybe eventually you'll figure all this stuff out. But of course, I'll be gone. I'll be up in Iowa complaining about stuff. Racial disparities plague the criminal justice system. There's a shock for you. It is predicted that 1 out of every 3 African American boys born today will spend will spend at least some time in prison. We're talking about prison. We're not talking about jail here. We're talking about prison. We're not talking about going to the county jail for 30 days. We're talking about going to prison for 1 to 6 or 5 to 10. 1 in 6 Latino males will end up in prison, and 1 in 17 white males. So obviously there's a problem here. And of course we don't have the statistics on natives. For one thing, we're not supposed to accumulate those statistics. It pisses people off. It pisses the tribe off because they don't want people to think that American Indians are bad people. Okay. Although crime rates among females are much lower, racial disparities are still apparent. So if you look at a television show, probably the female inmates are African American. I've done something with my clicker. Okay. Psychologists have identified at least 7 different goals of punishment. The first one is general deterrence. If you know that you can go to jail. As a matter of fact, they did a study with the United States military. They asked the individuals, if you knew that you wouldn't be caught, would you rape somebody? And a shocking number of soldiers said yes, they would. The number was 1 out of every 3 soldiers said that they would rape somebody if they knew that they wouldn't be caught. Being caught is called deterrence. Just the idea that you're going to embarrass yourself and embarrass your family and embarrass and spend some time in jail, that has to do with deterrence. The punishment of an offender is assumed to discourage other potential lawbreakers. One of the reasons that people don't just wander around killing people is because they know they'll end up in jail, in prison, and they don't want to do that. Individual deterrence, punishment of an offender is presumed to keep that person from committing other crimes in the future. So we put them in jail for a select amount of time, 6 to 10 or whatever. And that's another reason why they don't do it, because of the individual deterrence. Incapacitation, if a convicted offender is sent to prison, society can feel safe from that felon while he or she is confined. I don't know whether you're afraid of some of these criminals, but a lot of these individuals, they just need to be taken off the street. If we can take them off the street, then we don't have to worry about the drug cartels, whatever. We don't have to worry about them fencing drugs. We don't have to worry about them beating people up or robbing people, if we can get them off the street. Number 4, retribution. Offenders should not benefit from their crimes. Rather, they should receive their just deserts. And usually the just deserts means taking them out of society. Most people want to be in society. I was watching a movie the other day. It was from 1941. It had Alan Ladd in it. And he was an individual, he was an assassin. And he would kill, all you needed to do was contract with him, and he would go and he would kill whoever the person was. And of course, the first murder that they showed, this individual hadn't paid a gambling debt, and he was reneging on the gambling debt. So he went into the place and shot the guy. Well, his girlfriend was in the next room, and she came out to see what was going on. She heard the shot. She came out to see what was going on, and then she closed the door, and he just pumped 8 shots through the door and killed her, of course. But he had no remorse whatsoever. He was a cold-blooded killer, and of course, he needed to get his just deserts. What would be the just deserts for a cold-blooded killer? Well, it would be execution, probably. In this case, he was right before World War II, and there were Nazis, and he infiltrated their group, and he destroyed the 5th Column group. Moral outrage. Punishment can give society a means of catharsis and relief from the feelings of frustration, hurt, loss, anger that result from being victims of crime. So it's good to punish these people for committing the crime, stealing the things that they steal, doing the things that they do. Rehabilitation is number 6, the hope that offenders will recognize the error of their ways and develop new skills, values, and lifestyles. This can happen. Rehabilitation is big in European countries. So if you commit a crime in the Netherlands, they'll put you in jail. The jails aren't like jails here in the United States. They're kind of like dorm rooms. They educate you. They will help you get another degree. Or a degree, if you don't have one, of course. They will try to rehabilitate you. And eventually, when they decide that you've been rehabilitated and you're not a danger to society, they release you into the public. And of course, that is one of the reasons why they have less crime in Europe than they do in the United States. We don't rehabilitate our criminals. We punish them in one way or the other. We incapacitate them. we get retribution against them, we are angry with them, so we punish them in that way. We try to deter them from committing the crime again. The last is, number 7 is restitution, and this is something else that they do in Europe. If I steal a diamond worth $1 million, I have to pay restitution. If that diamond is gone, I fenced it, I have to pay back that company all the money that diamond is worth. So one of the things that I will do is I will work until I restore that money to that company, as weird as that sounds. Anyway, restitution. Have to pay restitution. Most punishment goals are utilitarian. They are intended to accomplish a useful outcome, such as compensating the victim, deterring crime, or incapacitating or rehabilitating defendants. The original purpose of prisons was to rehabilitate correctional institutions, but high recidivism rates indicate prisons have not been very effective at rehabilitating offenders. If you remember, in the 1970s, we had a peace movement going on, we had a civil rights movement going on in the United States, and we started arresting people for smoking pot, for having drugs in their possession. So one of the things that we tried to do was we were actually punishing them. We were trying to get them off the street because we didn't want them to have riots in the street dealing with all of these things. If you watch a movie from the 1970s, they're really bad movies. I wouldn't if I were you. I wouldn't watch a movie from the 1970s.
So funny you said that because last, what was it, Tuesday? Was it 2 weeks ago? You watched that 70s movie, Interview Class.
Oh, yeah.
What was the movie?
It was,
Wild in the Streets?
What was it, Navajo Story?
No, it was,
I forgot what it was called, but
Too sure. Oh, was it
it was an
Avery?
old, yeah, it was an old Navajo video.
the Navajo way.
Was it a good movie?
It was pretty sad.
Pretty dated. The people had really weird hair, didn't they? And they wore really strange clothes. Bell-bottom trousers and whatnot.
Was that when polyester was big?
Oh.
I don't know, I'm not wearing that in 90-degree weather.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's a movie called Wild in the Street. You need to... No, don't watch it. It's a horrible, horrible movie. It's about this band. It's the most popular band in the United States, like the Beatles. They decide that they're going to take over the country. And so they put LSD in all the water supply. And I know, and the kids are groovy with it, okay? So they can handle it, but the old people can't. And so they put all the old people in concentration camps. And anybody over 30 they put in a concentration camp. So they're capturing people and putting them in jail. And they take over the Congress, of course. So the band members are the president, vice president, and secretary of state and whatnot. It's just the dumbest movie in the world. And of course, everybody has long hair. All the guys have long hair. And all the girls are braless and bouncing all over the place. There's no nudity.
The thing is though, people were like slim, because I don't even like the word skinny.
Skinny?
They were slim then.
They were slimmer.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't use skinny. You can use skinny all you want.
Since you made that statement, I noticed that I've been very careful not to use that. But anyways, yeah, that was what I noticed, my observation when we watched that video. I was like, there was no people that I saw that was overweight.
Watch a television show from another country. A travelogue of Peru or Chile.
Uh-huh.
There's no fat people.
Yeah.
But in the United States, we're all like, had no muscle mass, we're just globs of goo.
Yeah, it's terrible.
We look like Java the Hutt or something.
Dang.
I know, we're terrible. It's not my
The
fault.
reason why back in those times they were so slim is because they weren't they weren't taken over by these corporate, entities.
Well, that's probably a pretty good point. We ate better food. We ate a lot more fried food. What else was our problem? What other problems did we have? Every third, there weren't that many fast food restaurants. Every third one wasn't a McDonald's.
Well, and people were smoking out of control.
They were
So
smoking
their
a
taste
lot.
buds were probably off. Because I remember when I was asking my sister about this, I was like, do you remember when we were little and we would go to a Denny's or somewhere and then you walk into the restaurant and they say smoking or non? And
Right.
then now you don't even see that anymore.
You used to be able to smoke on airplanes.
You guys are wild back then.
Oh, we were wild.
Smoking
That's
with your
true.
babies and all kinds of stuff.
Well, we got cigarettes in our C rations.
Did you smoke?
No. No, I used to sell mine for candy. I used
For
to
honey
trade
bunnies.
for candy bars. And I didn't drink either, which was kind of weird. Because, you would be humping through the jungle and then at the end of the day, they would drop a barrel of beer.
I just think that that's really interesting.
Or 5 barrels of beer and 1 barrel of pop. And of course, by the end of the day, all the beer's gone, or by the end of the night, all the beer's gone, and there's like 3 cans of pop that are missing. So,
Do you just not, have you just never liked it?
it doesn't taste good to me. Alcohol has a really strong flavor. It's like it burns. And it just doesn't make any sense to me. I'd rather drink Coke
Mountain Dew.
or Mountain Dew, or Mountain Dew. I'm not addicted, I can stop anytime I want. I don't really like the yellow stuff, it's the red stuff I like.
That Code Red.
Code Red, yeah. It's, has a blast of cherry.
I seen this video somewhere, they were talking about how they get that, color red 40.
Why would I want a color? It's blue and red mixed together. If you've ever seen Code Red, it's not really red, it's kind of.
But the red 40, they get it from these little bugs.
Oh, is that right?
They're like little beetles. And like when you squeeze them, all that red stuff
It's their guts.
comes out. Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much, yeah.
Oh, jeez, you're making me thirsty just thinking about it. The original purpose of prisons was to rehabilitate. These were known as correctional institutions, but of course we've had a recidivism rate problem. Recent research suggests that rehabilitation can be effective when it is tailored to an offender. Unfortunately, many institutions offer only one-size-fits-all interventions, and usually that one size has to do with either drugs. Two of the punishment goals, retribution and moral outrage, are retributive. They involve looking back at the offense and determining what the criminal deserves as a consequence of committing it. Public preferences for deterrence and retribution, using a technique called policy capturing. Carl Smith et al. In 2002 assessed people's punishment motives, deterrence versus retribution. The data showed a high sensitivity to factors associated with retribution and relative insensitivity to factors associated with deterrence. In other words, we're not really trying to stop crime, we're trying to punish you for what you did. We want you to suffer. We want retribution. That's one of the reasons why if somebody murdered somebody back in the day, they used to have public hangings. They were looking for retribution, and people would cheer and scream and have a great time hanging the individual. People's preferences for punishment apparently focuses on their sense of what an offender deserves. Interestingly, that's not what people say about their punishment beliefs. They talk about punishment as if it is. They just want the individual to understand that they made a mistake. People are more likely to indicate support for punishment that deters criminals People have a limited awareness of their reasons for their punishment preferences. One of the retributive goals, moral outrage, allows society the satisfaction of knowing that offenders have been made to pay for the harms that they have caused. And of course, people were talking about castrating the individual that murdered the little 10-year-old. I'm not sure what they would have done with the woman that was part of the whole murder process. I'm not sure what they would do to her. She didn't have any sexual parts they could cut off, so they weren't. They wanted to cut his penis off. They wanted to cut his balls off. They wanted to take care of his sexual urges that way. I have talked to individuals that thought that rape should be punished with castration, so that they can't reproduce. Of course, that's all that would do, that they could still have sex. Strangely enough, you can still have sex without testicles.
When I was,
All you need is a penis, I'm sorry. Just the way it works.
when I was in high school, I heard, I think it was in my sociology class that brought that up, like, the practices on, I guess, sexual practices across the world, and how some of them are like illegal up to a certain age. And I think one of them they were talking about was like how they would, I guess, cut the clitoris off a woman so she wouldn't have sexual arousals.
That's
In Africa somewhere?
Yeah,
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah.
sure.
So I was just like, that's kind of.
It's just circumcision.
So that's a way that you could punish women, I guess. I mean,
Well, they're punishing women because women are oversexed. That's their idea anyway, that women are oversexed. So they cut away the clitoris so that she can't get sexual pleasure from intercourse. Intercourse is supposed to be for reproductive purposes only, not for enjoyment.
so I think that's.
Not the enjoyment
that's
of the
just
woman
it, like,
anyway.
if we could just find a way to do that to men. Cause like, honestly, I feel like that should be done to somebody who has raped someone.
What, we're gonna cut their penises off?
Yeah.
Wow. I've never known any, I'm thinking of all the societies, I can't think of a single society where they actually cut the penis off.
I'm sure that the individual would die though.
No. You remember John Wayne Bobbitt? His wife cut off his penis with a butcher knife. She was driving down the road, she threw it out the window, and they found
They
it
reattached it.
in an intersection. They reattached his penis, yeah. She actually cut his penis off. And he made a pornographic movie, if I'm not mistaken.
Dang.
Personally, I've never seen it, but,
Is it from the 70s?
no,
I
this
wonder
is,
how you know about
this
this
is
anyway.
from the 80s or the 90s.
That's interesting.
Cut somebody's penis off. Soldiers used to do that with the enemy, usually after they were dead.
Yeah.
Yeah. I knew a guy that collected ears, another guy collected noses. And the weird guy was the one that collected penises, because the penis looks like a little finger after it's cut off. There's not much to it. People think the penises look like they look when they're erect, but the reality is they're not erect all that frequently. That's weird. Why are we talking about penis? Oh, we're talking about retribution, of course. Okay. The impetus of alternative sentences like shaming is twofold. Judges have become frustrated with revolving door justice. Many offenders who are released from prison eventually return, suggesting that their punishment had little long-term effectiveness. Judges are aware of the problem of prison overcrowding and the high cost of incarceration, and this is true. So let's not worry about this, because we're more worried about how much money we're spending for the prisons, okay? So let's just let these guys out. And as long as they know that that's going to happen, potentially we have no control over them. They're going to commit their crime, spend their 6 months in jail, and then be released, of course. Why don't we stop right here and take this up next time? We can talk more about